This is the Global Dark Archives. This is the story of the most disastrous nuclear accident in human history, Chernobyl. And if you'd like to learn more about stories like these, stay tuned for more information. On April 26, 1986, right after midnight, inside reactor number 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, a test began. It was supposed to be routine, a simple check, nothing dangerous. But within minutes, Chernobyl would erupt into the worst nuclear disaster in human history. A catastrophe that poisoned nations, scarred generations, and changed the course of the world. The Chernobyl disaster happened because of a flawed RBMK reactor design and critical operator mistakes during a late-night safety test. Operators let the reactor run at dangerously low power and disabled key safety systems. When they pressed the emergency shutdown button, the control rod's graphite tips caused a sudden power surge instead of stopping it. In seconds, the reactor's output spiked to over 100 times normal. Fuel rods overheated, water turned to steam, and 2 massive explosions destroyed the reactor. With no containment dome, radioactive material spread freely, creating the worst nuclear accident in history. The reactor lid was blown. Pieces of it rained across the plant, contaminating everything they touched. The intense radiation coming from the molten fuel melted the sand and created a crater under the reactor. The radiation burned through the concrete floor, seeping into the ground and groundwater. It entered the basements of buildings, killing anyone who dared to go down there. In the control room, the main generator tripped. The lights went out. Chaos erupted. Operators were thrown to the floor. The main control panel was wrecked. The backups were dead. The fire alarm was not working. The only way to extinguish the fire was to pump water from the cooling pond. But without electricity, that was impossible. 3 workers were close to the reactor and saw what happened. One of them, Viktor Brakhanov, would later recall, "When I opened the door and saw that blue light, I immediately realized that it was the end of the world." He tried to sound the alarm, but his voice was hoarse. The other workers had already passed out. Viktor managed to call the fire department and tell them to come quickly and bring protective clothing. Then, he passed out on the floor. He survived. By the next morning, the entire roof of the reactor building was gone. A helicopter flew over the reactor site and realized that something was seriously wrong. Rescue teams were sent in right away. But those men were not told the truth about what they were dealing with. They were told it was a simple fire. Those firefighters were heroes. But they were sent to a terrible fate because the authorities didn't want to panic the population. The men climbed the roof to put out the fire. They poured water onto the smoldering graphite, but it had no effect. Their boots melted on the hot graphite. They picked up glowing debris with their bare hands. They walked through fields picking berries to eat because they were hungry, having no idea that those berries were now contaminated and dangerous. Many of those firefighters died within days. Their bodies were filled with radiation. The firefighters from the nearby towns also rushed to help, but they were told not to mix with the firefighters who were already there. After all, this was not a radiation incident. So the men split into groups and raced across the area to find hot spots and pour water onto them. All the while, their dosimeters were clicking frantically. Dosimeter is a device that measures the amount of radiation you've been exposed to. It clicks with every milligram per hour of radiation, but these men heard hundreds of clicks per minute. Realizing that they were in danger, the men started running away. They wanted to escape as fast as possible, but the race against radiation couldn't be won. None of them survived. For 2 full days, the people of Pripyat, a nearby town where the plant workers and their families lived, they went about their daily routines, completely unaware of what was happening just 2 miles away. They went to work, played with their children, and watched the blue glow in the sky. But that glow was not the northern lights. It was the deadly plume of radiation rising above Chernobyl. Those people were being poisoned. Buses arrived on the evening of the 2nd day and announced that everyone must be evacuated, that they would return in a few days. Families packed a bag and left food on tables, toys on the floor, photographs on the walls. They never returned. As if the catastrophe wasn't horrible enough, the Soviet authorities lied about the scale of the disaster for days. They didn't want to admit that the nuclear power plant was on fire and that radioactive material was poisoning the surrounding areas. They didn't want to panic the population. So they told everyone that nothing happened, that it was safe to stay or return home. In reality, between 28 and 31 people died in the first few days alone. But it wasn't until 28th that buses began evacuating people from Pripyat. Radiation doesn't discriminate. It traveled across borders, reaching Belarus, Poland, Sweden, Germany, and the United Kingdom. But it was detected in Sweden before Moscow admitted anything had happened. The first news came from radiation detectors that sounded an alarm. They registered unprecedented levels of radiation in the atmosphere. The world learned of Chernobyl not from the Soviets, but from radiation detectors thousands of miles away. The invisible enemy had crossed borders, and the Soviet Union could no longer hide it. Over the following weeks, hundreds of thousands of people, known as liquidators, were mobilized to contain the disaster at Chernobyl. They worked long hours in dangerous conditions, facing heat, smoke, and intense radiation. Helicopters dropped sand, lead, and boron onto the exposed reactor core to smother the fire and reduce radioactive emissions. Robotic machines were initially sent in to perform some tasks, but most were quickly disabled by radiation. In some of the most dangerous operations, liquidators were ordered onto the reactor roof to shovel burning graphite and debris back into the core. Their exposure was carefully timed, sometimes just a few minutes, to limit radiation doses, but many still suffered severe or fatal radiation sickness. To contain the disaster, workers constructed a massive concrete sarcophagus around Reactor 4, designed to trap radioactive materials and prevent further leaks. It became a grim tomb for the reactor that had unleashed radiation across the region. In the months following the explosion, dozens of liquidators and plant workers died from acute radiation sickness. Some, like Alexei Ananenko, were very young. Officially, 31 people died within the first few weeks of the disaster, though thousands more later suffered cancers, thyroid disease, and other radiation-related illnesses. Entire villages around Chernobyl were abandoned, and farmlands remained contaminated. Families were displaced, and generations continued to experience the physical and psychological effects of the disaster. But the worst part of the story is the fact that Chernobyl was largely preventable. The RBMK reactor had known design flaws, including instability at low power, and warnings from engineers were ignored. Critical safety systems were disabled, and operators were unaware of the risks. Bureaucracy and secrecy prioritized pride over safety, leading directly to the catastrophic explosion and thousands of lives lost. The true impact of the Chernobyl disaster can still be seen today. The world became much more careful about nuclear power and safety protocols. International standards were rewritten. Transparency and accountability became essential, and the Soviets learned their lesson. In the years since then, Russia has made great strides in improving workplace safety and openness. Today, Chernobyl stands frozen in time. Pripyat is a ghost city. Parks are filled with abandoned strollers. School desks are empty. Playground equipment is covered with vines. A Ferris wheel is frozen mid-rotation. But Reactor 4 is a reminder of the disaster that struck here in 1986. It is encased in a new steel sarcophagus, a symbol of the world's commitment to never repeat the past. A promise to learn from tragedy. Today, Reactor 4 sits beneath a massive steel structure, the new safe confinement. It weighs over 10,000 tons and was carefully slid into place over the old sarcophagus to contain radioactive material and prevent further leaks. The air above the reactor glows faintly with residual radiation, a reminder of the disaster decades ago. The entire area is now a highly controlled exclusion zone. Only people with special permission can enter. Thank you so much for watching this episode. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like. Consider sharing it and subscribing. Take care.